But A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood was a really good film. Let me go ahead and jump into the review of that so I can add to this. But the movie was really good. It was one of those inspiring type films. It had a lot of nostalgia to it. And it had a lot of emotion to it. And that's just right off the bat. Like, that's common sense. You don't even have to see the movie in order to know that it was going to have that. It does has a lot of that. I was surprised to know that this movie isn't generally about like Mr. Rogers. This movie is about Matthew Rice's character, who is a journalist, and he is sent to interview Mr. Rogers and end up befriending him. And Mr. Rogers kind of like changes his life for the better. And so it's basically just a story of that, his friendship with Mr. Rogers, with this chance encounter, and just him getting things together in his life and becoming a better person. And it was well acted. Of course, you know Tom Hanks did extravagant in it. He did really good as Mr. Rogers. Like, when you watch the movie, you see Mr. Rogers. You don't see Tom Hanks, and that's what I really liked about it, is that he really embodied him. And if you don't know too much about Mr. Rogers, if you've seen the movie "Won't You Be My Neighbor," it's a documentary that came out last year, you would get a better sense of who Mr. Rogers is. You know, you might got a sense of him, you know, growing up with the show and all that stuff and everything else. But when you watch the documentary, if you don't know too much about it, you will get a sense of who he is. Because honestly, if you just see this movie right off the bat, don't know really too much about Mr. Rogers, you may get a creepy feeling about it. I don't know. It's it's kind of like one of those things to where it's like you can't believe this person is who he is, but then it's like, yeah, he is who he is. It's not a facade. It's not a character that he played. This is genuinely who he is. He is this person. Mr. Rogers is Fred Rogers. Fred Rogers is Mr. Rogers. He's not a character. This is the person that he is. And he brought that to life. Tom Hanks brought that to life. Matthew Rice's character was just Matthew Rice. He did really good up in this movie. Did really, really good. And just embodied the character that he was playing, and it's like you kind of like felt for him. And like I said, this movie is just filled with emotions. There is a lot of drama, anger, sadness. There is a lot of happiness in this movie, and you feel all that going throughout the movie. So it does its job. And certain styles of the movie are kind of, I had to get used to, but I got used to real quick. There is a transition throughout the film where, in between scenes, where you know it may have stock footage of like city streets and stuff like that. It has that in a toy form, like as like you know the what he had in Mister Rogers and all that stuff. So it was kind of reminiscent of that. So I feel like, just honestly, a lot of people that watch this and know who Mr. Rogers is, grew up watching the show and all that stuff, are going to have a lot of nostalgic feelings of this movie. You know, just going back to their childhood and all that stuff. And it did really, it got to me. You know, it got to me. I wasn't a huge fan of Mr. Rogers. I did watch him when I was a little kid, but you know, I felt like this is going to touch a lot of people, especially if they grew up on them. To give it a rating, I would give this movie a 9. I would give this movie a 9. Definitely go check it out. If you were curious about this movie, definitely check it out. If you were a fan of Mr. Rogers, you grew up with him, like I said, watching him and all that stuff, you would definitely really like this film. You could not get a better person to play Mr. Rogers in this film, and Tom Hanks did incredible.